It's the first snow I've seen in about 15 years. So in honor of that, we're gonna make some hard apple cider. Snow isn't that weird, but seeing snow on a banana tree, it's kind of weird.
I just said, yes, man, right away, anything.
Alright, so today we're gonna do some apple cider. And yes, there are dozens of videos on YouTube about how to do hard apple cider. But the one thing that's different about the way I do it is that I don't use any preservatives. I don't use any artificial sweeteners. This is literally just apple juice. And yet, I can still get a sweet, sparkling hard apple cider. So, stick with me. This is a really easy recipe. We're just gonna, once again, take some Kroger apple juice and some Lavlin 1118 little champagne yeast. So we're just gonna combine these. We're gonna put an airlock in the top of the jug. And since we're gonna do this one on the cheap, we're gonna roughen up the tops of our apple juice jugs with a knife so that the hot glue we're gonna use later will stick really well. We're just gonna take a drill and drill a hole through the lid of these jugs so that they accommodate an airlock spile. Then we're just gonna throw a little hot glue on there, and we've got ready-made fermentation vessels without having to do much of anything. You can use a balloon for this process, but I like doing an airlock just because it's cooler looking. So, yeah. So one of the things that's really important about doing any sort of apple cider or apple jack is that you need to use apple juice or whatever type of juice you're using that has no preservatives in it. It can have ascorbic acid, but no potassium sorbate. If it has potassium sorbate, that will kill off the yeast and your fermentation will never take off. I already create enough fart smell on my own, and I don't need my fermentations doing it. So whenever you're doing any fermentation with apple juice, apple cider, grab, apple jack, always use some yeast nutrient to make sure that the yeast is nice and healthy and happy and it doesn't start getting stressed. Stressed yeast makes fart smells. Not good. Trust me. And one other thing we're also gonna add, if you want to have nice clear apple cider, apple juice has a lot of pectin in it, and pectin makes for a very hazy brew no matter what you're doing. So you want to always add some pectic enzyme to your apple cider and apple jack just to make sure that you can get it as clear as possible. So now that we've got our apple cider with the yeast nutrient and the pectic enzyme and its yeast, we're gonna go throw it in a dark area so that it can do its thing. All right, so our cider has been sitting for about a month and a half, something like that. And it's completed fermentation, and it's also gotten nice and clear. Let's take a look. Most of the time, if you want to make a sweet, sparkling hard cider, you have to basically use something that won't ferment any further to sweeten your cider. So you would take something like stevia or something. You let your cider ferment out completely. You put some stevia in it to sweeten it, and then you carbonate it. And really, that's not good. That's gross. Once you put your cider into the bottle, with your whatever you're going to use to sweeten it, sugar, apple juice, whatever, the yeast that's remaining in that cider is going to eat up the sugars that are in that juice or sugar syrup, whatever you put in there, to carbonate the bottles for you. But in doing that, they eat all the sugar, so there's no sweetness left, and you end up with a dry, hard cider. That's not bad, but that's not what we're going for today. So how do we make the yeast stop doing what it wants to do and make sure that it leaves us with a carbonated sweet cider. Well, let's bottle it first. A lot of people use a keg for doing their cider just because it makes this process a little bit simpler. You know, they'll drop a Camden tablet in it to kill all the yeast, and then they'll throw in their sweetener, and then they'll carbonate it. But I don't have that option because I'm still bottling because I don't have a keg set up. You know, what can I say? I'm broke. So let's go ahead and get to the bottling, and then I'll show you how we're actually going to make this magic happen. I don't want to use anything artificial to back sweeten my hard cider. I want it to taste super appley and to also be sweet and to also get the carbonation that I'm looking for. So all I'm going to do is take my hard cider and add one of these. Concentrated apple juice. You want to make sure that it doesn't have any preservatives in it. This one has vitamin C or ascorbic acid to preserve it, but that's fine. It's not going to hurt the yeast. Take one of these, thaw it out, and we're going to add it to our hard cider right before bottling. So I've got my 2-gallon bottling bucket set up with a spigot on it. I just get these free from the bakery in the grocery store. They're just icing buckets. They're just going to throw them away, so always go over and ask and see if they've got any that they're going to toss and get yourself a free bucket. Plus, they make great small batch fermenters. Now that we have our hard cider and apple juice concentrate mixed together, we're just going to bottle it. But we're going to do something a little bit different because we want to be able to stop the fermentation that's happening inside the bottles, the bottle carbonation, the bottle conditioning. We want to stop that at a very specific point. Basically, when we have enough carbonation, we're going to shut off the fermentation. The way that we're going to know that we have enough carbonation in the bottle, without having to open one, we're going to use one of these. This is going to be our test vessel, and all we're going to do is fill it up, just bottle it like normal. Don't worry, it will hold the pressure. And every day we're going to go and squeeze this bottle and see if it's firm. Once it gets firm enough, usually about 4 days in, then your carbonation is ready. And once we get to that point, I'll catch up with you. Now we're just going to wait until that Coke bottle is firm to the touch, to the squeeze, just as if it were a brand new Coke. Alright, it's been about 4 days, so now we know that our hard cider is carbonated but still a little bit sweet. We know that because we filled this bottle up at the same time as we filled the glass bottles. All we have to do to test it to make sure it's ready is give it a squeeze, and it should feel like a fresh, unopened soda. Nice and firm, and you can see there's very little give in that bottle at all, and the cider's coming out nice and clear. So now that the bottles are carbonated to the level that we want, and we know that we've still got some sugar left in there, we're going to do a process called pasteurization. Basically, we're just going to heat the bottles up to a temperature that will kill off the yeast and then let them cool slowly down. So let's get that started. Pay close attention to this next process because it is a little bit tricky. There is a potential for catastrophic failure. So be careful. Good luck. Don't blow up your kitchen. So now all we have to do is get a pot of water up to 180 degrees, put our bottles in, let them sit for about 10 minutes to kill off the yeast, and then just let them cool to room temperature overnight. One thing you need to note is that when you're filling up your pot, make sure that the water in your pot is going to come up above the level of the liquid in your bottles, because it's got to cover that in order to kill all the yeast. A word of caution here, when you're heating up that water, Do not put the bottles in the pot. Nothing in the pot except the water. Bring it up to 180, turn off the heat, then put your bottles in, then put the lid on and walk away from it for about 10 minutes. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed Disco Fish. He's our house mascot other than the dog. So these bottles are done. Now we're just gonna let them air cool on the counter overnight, and then you can do whatever you want to with them. You can refrigerate them, you can pack them and send them to a buddy, whatever you want to do. The main reason to do this is we're not using a chemical stabilizer to stop the yeast activity. We're using just heat. So there's no preservatives, there's no nothing in there. This is what pasteurization is. Gives you the opportunity to keep the sweetness without adding an artificial sweetener, and to stop the yeast activity so you can keep the carbonation where you want it. And also it makes it shelf stable. So, you know, the fact that you can do that without spending any extra money on chemicals or putting anything in there that you maybe don't want, any preservatives, whatever, I really like this process. So after all that, the fermentation, the siphoning, the bottling, and then the pasteurization, what do we have left to enjoy? Was it worth it? Does it taste good? Well, all of those bottles that I pasteurized, they're all gone. I gave them to my sister and brother-in-law for Christmas, and they drank them all. I think I gave them about 12 bottles, and they drank them all in a couple of weeks. So they said I should become a cider maker. You know, I'm not going to take their word for it, but at least that means that they enjoyed it. And what that also means to me is that this process is solid enough for me to share with you. Hopefully you can do this in your own kitchen and have some equally fantastic results. So what I do have left is my one little Coke bottle that I used for my pressure testing to make sure I had enough carbonation in my glass bottles without having to crack one open and waste it. So we still have this one to enjoy. Oh yeah. This has been sitting in the refrigerator for a month. It's still got some sweetness, crazy amount of apple aroma, got some good tartness to it, and just the right amount of sparklings. The CO2 I think is just right in there. I thought when I poured it, there was such a big head on it, I thought maybe that was a little too much, but it died down real quick, and it's just about right. And the more times you do this, the easier it's going to get for you to dial in the amount of sweetness. You know, like if you want less sweetness but just a little bit, you can go for another day. Once you hit maximum firmness on that Coke bottle, if you want a little more sweetness, just when it's almost there on the firmness, go ahead and pasteurize it and you're good to go. So lots of variability, lots of room for adjustment in this whole process to give you your own unique flavor. So, you know, have fun with it, play around, do some experimentation, and try this with some other juices. You can do exactly the same process on pear juice, grape juice, anything you want to do. So, as always, thanks for watching.
So if you enjoyed this video and you learned anything, go ahead and hit that like button. If you have any questions, go ahead and post them down in the comments section down below, and I'll do my best to answer them for you. And if you want to find out what I'm going to do next, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And hit the little bell icon right next to it, and that way you'll get notified when I post new content. I'm a little bit dizzy. Maybe that was too much helium. Oh. I haven't done that in a while.